Thank you.
Okay. All right, so up next, one of the questions that everyone has, especially lately, is are we controlling technology or is technology controlling us? So here to talk about the use of technology and turning technology humane, please welcome several people. First up, Aza Raskin, who is the co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, who also helped build the web at Mozilla, and Jan Tallinn, co-founder of the Future of Life Institute, and also co-founder of Skype. I think that's the second co-founder of Skype we've had on stage today, which is kind of amazing. And to lead our conversation from NBC News, Alyssa Newcomb. It's amazing to have all of you with us today. Please welcome our panel.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. So we're here to talk about how to make tech more humane. Tech giants are shaping the attention and the behavior of billions of people, and we've seen the consequences. People are outraged on Twitter, elections are being influenced, conspiracy theories are running rampant, people are even asking their doctor to give them plastic surgery to look like their Snapchat filter. And also these big tech companies are developing tools, AI tools, that are also causing some concern. So we're lucky to be joined by two visionaries who can speak to both of these areas. And my first question really is simple. Are we screwed?
Sort of up to us, I think. I don't like the default outcomes. That's why being cultivating an ecosystem in the world who's trying to figure out how can we survive the long-term technological risks.
Yeah, we don't have to be.
No.
And I think we are at an incredible moment right now because there's a still chance for awareness to create the opportunity for choice. Because, on what basis are we making decisions if the landscape within which we're making decisions is chosen for us, right? Been thinking recently about Gmail autocomplete. Do people in here, are people using the Gmail autocomplete, the new thing they just, right? So here's the thought that's been going through my head. So to the Snapchat filter question, if you wanted to grab as much engagement as possible, right? We're living through two archetypical times, like two archetypical stories. The first is be careful what you wish for, because you're going to get it. And two, the creator is losing control of their creation. So what did we wish for? We wish for maximizing our attention. Let's grab as much human attention as possible. Well, careful what you wish for. How are our systems doing it? Well, one way, instead of grabbing your attention every time, that's a lot of work. How about if I could change your values, change your identity? So it's not that it's just getting your attention, I'm getting you addicted to needing attention. Okay, how might I do that? Well, maybe by undermining your self-esteem. How would I do that? Well, how about if I showed you every single day proof in numbers that people liked you better if you just looked a little different than you actually do? And that's how we get to the stat that 55% of plastic surgeons in the US in 2017 have seen patients that want to change their faces to look like their Snapchat filter. How about another way to undermine self-esteem? How about if I showed you proof every single day that people liked you more if you lived a life that isn't the one you're actually living? Right? That's social media, that's Instagram. Everyone knows that when you see the highlight reels of other people's lives, you feel bad because of comparison sadness, but there's a deeper felt sense, which is your life not being in accordance with how you project it. And that's how we've seen the rise of suicide and online and high depressive symptoms in women jumping from around 17%, and then 2013 starts to climb all the way up to 29%. In 2017. And now you're like, okay, back to the Gmail example. I know, it's actually pretty good. I start to
Yeah.
hit the tab a whole bunch. What happens in another year or two, you start getting the analytics that people like you more, you're getting better engagement, your business is going better, if your personality is just different than it actually was, is the one where you hit tab. And you realize, oh yeah, the analytics are going to start pushing us to outsource our personality, and we're going to want that feature.
That's pretty scary, honestly. Looking at this from an AI perspective, Jan, I want to ask you, I mean, what can really be done here when it seems like there's a small group making a lot of decisions that could potentially have devastating effects on the majority? I think, for instance, about Google's Project Maven. There's so many other examples like this.
Yeah, right. So like one way of kind of framing the problem that we're facing as a civilization is that sort of the planet is not getting bigger, but the effective radius of technology is getting bigger. So it's kind of like in fewer and fewer hands, there's like a bigger and bigger power. Like I sometimes joke that if the world is going to be destroyed, like literally destroyed, in the next 20 years, I hope the probability is small, but I cannot give zero probability. I will probably know the person who did it, because like I've been kind of in these circles for 10 years now. So like, yeah, so one thing that I kind of personally have been doing is kind of, from one hand, kind of using my sort of brand and capital to invest in various companies so I could go there and literally hang around in their kitchens, talk about kind of potential side effects of what they're doing. That's how I became an investor in DeepMind, for example. And like there's like a list of other kind of companies who I think are kind of potentially creating very powerful technologies. And from the other hand, I've been just kind of using my philanthropy to fund and support people who are kind of deliberately wanting to do, or kind of stepping up to do the homework of technologists. And so I've been supporting places like Future Humanity Institute in Oxford, who is just like a group of like really brilliant people trying to figure out like what we as a civilization should be doing and how can we kind of best go forward from here.
Do you have a checklist that you look for when you're making investments or looking for people who are really trying to do the homework to create a product that isn't going to degrade humanity and our values? What do you look for?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I mean, there's always like this dilemma that from one hand, if there's like potentially dangerous thing that people are doing, it's not clear if it's like a great to kind of support them in the first place. On the other hand, like if I see that they are actually kind of people that are kind of have like consciousness, and are smart enough to understand that there might be problems. So I think that then kind of I think my involvement would actually kind of increase the probabilities of good outcomes. So one thing that I definitely do is kind of filter whether people are kind of smart enough to understand the kind of potential side effects, and if they do, then try to kind of help them.
Now, Isa, I want to ask you about downgrading, this term that the Center for Humane Technology has really pushed out into our lexicon over the past couple weeks. Can you explain to everyone what downgrading is in the sense of how you're using the term?
Yeah. So really the concept is, as we've been upgrading our machines, we've been downgrading our humanity, our relationships, our civility, and really it just comes back to this interconnected set of problems that starts with the extractive attention economy, right? So we now self-interrupt on screens. Our attention span is on median 40 seconds. Right? So that's not a notification coming in. This is the call is coming from inside the house kind of thing. Like we now self-interrupt every 40 seconds. Why? Well, it's because we are being optimized for the extraction of our attention. It's just way easier to grab more of attention if we're constantly looking around, All right, so our attention span is going down. What does that mean? Well, for attention spans down, that means the kinds of messages that we can send back and forth to each other, they have to get smaller, right? They're just less nuanced, which means that we have to get louder and more outrageous, which means that you start getting like more polarization, which means that we can't have civil discourse, which means that now that there's more us versus them thinking, trust starts to go down, what does that mean? Well, that means that's the breeding ground for both fascism and populism. And so you sort of like, you start to see how all of these things are an interconnected set of problems, right? Now, I'm not claiming that tech is the only thing driving this, right? Human beings are complicated species, but if you take our bad sides, amplify them, and show them back to ourselves, what do you think is going to happen? So this is what we call downgrading. You can say human downgrading, but you just say, like, is this thing... Sometimes I like to think of human beings as a kind of like origami. Like, what is nature? Human nature are where our folds in the origami are. What is nurture? It's how you fold it up. The same set of folds can make a set of, can make a crane or can make a frog, based on how you fold it up. What is technology? Technology is this thing that, like, like it needs to fold along our lines, otherwise it does severe damage. And right now, the technical term of this is ergonomics. The ergonomics of our technology, both our social ergonomics, our individual ergonomics, is starting to tear our fabric, and we all feel it. That is human downgrading is the term. And the reason we want to give it such a clear and concise term is because right now, everyone is pushing on different problems. Like, imagine a time before we could call it global climate change. So some people are working on, the ozone hole. Other people are working on melting glaciers. Other people are working on species extinction. And, each group is trying as hard as they can, but there's just not enough momentum when you push in these disparate panels. So now that there's one term, global climate change, we can start to affect change. Right now in technology, right, we're like, okay, well, there's election hacking. There's the rise of conspiracy theories. There is, teen depression and suicide. So he's like, oh, we have all these different problems, and it seems really hard. We have privacy. Everyone's pushing on their own thing. But if we're like, hey, actually, all of these disparate problems have one unified cause, that means we can get behind it and start to make a change.
So speaking of trying to change the underlying cause, I've been talking to people who kind of call themselves mechanism designers. So the idea is that a lot of the problems that we're seeing, like with Facebook, etc., comes down to kind of like basic sort of incentive structures that these companies that these companies have because of the pull of the markets, and then like these incentives get passed on to the employees, etc. So can we kind of like actually kind of take a step back and see like how would we want the incentives to look like? So my friend is Glenn Weil. He has been working on this kind of community called Radical Exchange, and like he has been thinking about like how should we kind of redesign the capitalism? Yeah. How should we redesign the representative democracy in order to actually kind of have better incentives to push the society forward?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most interesting things for us to be thinking about now. There's an idea in biology called inclusive fitness. The idea being, like, why does a mother take care of their child? Well, in part, the biology of it is that you guys share genes, which means that you're biologically incented, if you want your genes to continue being passed down, to take care of your kid. Of course, that's not what's going on inside of your head, but it's been like, that's where one of the folds of human nature is. And so thinking about these AI systems, these AI systems have a kind of supremacy or asymmetric advantage over us, right? Because they can look at all of your data, they can find the 10,000 other people that are like you, and see how you decide. How many people actually, this is an interesting question, have the feeling that Facebook is like recording or listening to your conversations? Right? What is this?
Me too.
Wow. Okay, well, this seems like around half, right? So, people have done the forensic analysis. They don't. The truth, I think, is much creepier. And that is, Facebook in their servers has this little like voodoo doll of you. It doesn't look like you at the beginning. It's just like a generic, like, what is a human being? But then they're collecting, like, why does privacy matter? They're collecting your toenail clippings and your click trails and your hair clipping. And slowly this little voodoo doll, this avatar, looks more and more and more like you until they can predict what you're going to do next. And they're getting so good that now half of the people in this room have this conspiracy sort of sitting in their head because it's just like a magic trick. You're like, the truth can't actually be they can just predict me. They have to be listening. But that's not what's going on. So whenever you have this kind of asymmetric power, we have something in law to deal with this. It's called a fiduciary or duty of care in the UK. And that says that, this is like when a doctor has like some power over you, or like your stockbroker has like asymmetric power over you. They have to, by law, act in your best interest. And I think we need similar kind of laws of fiduciary for AI to make it humane, so you can trust it, that it's acting in your best interest.
And while we're on the topic of Facebook, I want to ask you, we've seen Mark kind of shift the company into this private sharing, private is the future business model. Yesterday in the New York Times, Sundar, the CEO of Google, had an op-ed saying privacy should not be a luxury good and everything should be private in the future. Is this a good thing, or are there some inherent problems there that perhaps they're not really paying attention to right now?
Oh my God. So I'm, of course, of two minds. It's a very clever move, right? Because it's pitting two of my values against myself, right? Like, on one hand, I'm like, privacy. Yes, clearly we need more of that. We don't want people snooping, be able to, like, do these kind of predictive models on us. And also, we know that Facebook, in particular, does not look for problems. This talking to somebody who left, who's running the global elections integrity. And they're like, we're instructed not to look at the problems that were going to happen, because that creates liability. We can only look at problems that already happened, which to me is terrifying. And the way these problems get surfaced is generally via nonprofit, low-paid journalists, or going out there and finding these stories. That's only when they find the problems does Facebook have to deal with them. This is actually their model. They decide to do it. So if everything gets hidden further, how are we going to find any of it out? It's just like sweeping it beneath the rug. So I'm worried.
And taking that question to a broader level, Jan, when the tech industry goes through these dramatic shifts, how do you really weigh the benefits and the existential risk when you're going in a new direction?
Well, I think that there's one model that I have, specifically about AI, is like you can imagine it as like a drilling operation. That there's like a drill that's going deeper and deeper into the sort of like basic technologies of AI. It kind of surfaces things like linear regression and sort of convex optimization to deep learning, et cetera, and then these like techniques on the ground get like productized into different products and services. And a lot of discussion kind of focuses on how can we kind of live with these like ever more powerful services and products. And then it's really important to think about incentives. What do the people and organizations have? What kind of incentives they have to use and package these underlying technologies. However, there's also the other risk, which is the tip of the drill might actually touch something that's really explosive. So there's actually a somewhat interesting little overlap between the risks that come from the productization of the techniques that have been kind of unearthed by fundamental AI research, and the things that this thing, the tip of the drill, might touch. Because if you look around, almost everything we see is basically designed by human brains, unless you go into rainforest or something, certainly in cities. And that has been so for the last 5,000 up until 200,000 years, depending how you count. And it's possible that now we're going to see the tail end of that period. And that should give you some humility that if there's going to be a phase change, that this 200,000 year period is going to end, it's probably going to be more about than just how can we kind of make sure that Facebook behaves.
Yeah, exactly. I think E.O. Wilson really put this well, the sort of the father of sociobiology and a lot of evolutionary psychology. He said, the problem with humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, which sort of like the fast way of saying is that we are chimps with lasers.
Yeah, so I say that like if you kind of zoom out on an astronomical scale and look at like a point in space-time where we are at, and like just like the Big Bang just happened, like we have like most of the future in ahead, at least the universe has. And then I think about like, oh, this is like these ape-like creatures there. Like, what is the most important salient fact about them? I say that they are the minimum viable superintelligence builders. And for those apes, it's actually not a great position to be in. We want to be a little bit smarter, so we have like some margin of error in our kind of building the next intelligent agents here.
The one thing I would add to that is that we're also minimal viable reverse engineering ourselves creatures.
Yeah.
Not great, right? Like we're the first creature that can be like, ooh, like how do we work? Let's take all of our deep learning, our AI. You know, fMRIs. You can now. There's a paper out of Japan, beginning of this year, where they can reconstruct. We can reconstruct what you see from fMRI data. So they're like literally reading your brain. And of course, because you dream, when you dream, you run your visual cortex in reverse. That's how you see when you dream. That means like in our lifetimes, not that much longer, we are going to be able to start recording dreams. Rad, but also terrifying. So, you know, to play this trick of like, let's zoom way out. And we ask, what can we tell of any intelligent species anywhere in the universe? Sort of hard to say, but here's one thing we could say. We could say at some point, they take their telescope of their own intelligence and point it back at themselves and are like, oh, hey, how do I work? And then they reverse engineer themselves. When, you know, we sort of are getting that with CRISPR already, but we're also getting it, you know, psycho-emotionally with all these other tools, like these little voodoo dolls. So what happens when a creature can start to pull, like open up its metaphorical skull and start pull its own puppet strings as a species? Well, your input is connected to your output. You know when you like point a camera at a like a TV monitor and you get that infinite loop and you get these really crazy behaviors? The area of math that studies this behavior, it's called chaos. So the question is, why do we not see other intelligent species out there? Like, there's many reasons for Fermi's paradox.
It's a long answer.
Maybe it's this. It's that we're in the process of reverse engineering ourselves. Unless we're very careful about the initial conditions, whatever we've asked for in our system, it's going to give us, and we've already seen the power. So like one more sort of thought here, which is the singularity. Here's why I think the singularity is just not a useful thing to think about. It's because up here is like human strengths, human capacities, what we're good at. And the here, you know, here's the power of technology to overwhelm us, overwhelm our strengths, and up here, you know, that's the singularity. And it's always far away, and we get to have like sort of silly conversations about AGI and definitions of intelligence, because down here, this is human weakness, right? And technology starts to surpass human weakness, starts to find like the soft underbelly, the soft animal underbelly of the human mind much, much, much earlier. And that's the point we should all be worried about, because that's how we're going to get like eaten by robots, is because like what we value, how we make decisions is all going to be colonized.
I mean, you said rad but scary, and that pretty much sums up my feelings about this. I'm wondering though, do we need some sort of like central board or governing body, or who's going to keep an eye on everyone else? Who's going to be the adult in the room, the babysitter? Do we need that? Would that ever work?
Yeah, I think we need that, but it wouldn't work. So it's kind of yeah. It seems that technologists, although like, again, minimum viable as they're still better in understanding the side effects of the technology than the politicians are, certainly. One problem, though, is that they're not incentivized to look into the side effects. So, like, one question is, like, how can we actually create better incentives for technologists?
Yeah. Yeah, and how can we, like, imagine we just had sort of like a study abroad program for technologists. Amazing. Where every like CEO, every founder has to go spend at least half a year with the people that they're negatively impacting, right? Like already we know, like one of the problems with scale is that you're just so far removed that everything's really abstract. You're not using like the fact that humans have evolved for this thing called like mirror neurons empathy. When I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you, like I get a sense of how you feel. On the internet, you don't. So it's all very abstract. And I come back to that thought about how people get sentenced for committing murders. Like the difference between a person who commits one murder versus committing genocide. Do you know on average who gets punished more jail time? The person who commits a single murder. That's just a fact about how human beings work, because we can't imagine what it means to commit that many murders, but I can get and I understand the one murder.
It's called scope neglect.
Yep, exactly.
All right, guys. Well, I want to spend the last 2.5 minutes or so talking about what people in the room, I'm sure we have a lot of product engineers, designers, CEOs, founders, what they can take away from this, what they can do to make sure their product isn't really exploiting our weaknesses and polluting, given everything else we have going on.
So my standard answer to people, not necessarily kind of technologists specifically, but kind of young people who want to do good in the world and kind of like are trying to figure out what career should they choose or what they should be kind of focusing on, is go to the site called 80,000 hours, 80,000hours.org. It's a career advice organization that is, or career counseling organization that is informed about the long-term concerns such as runaway AI or bio risks, etc. So you would get an enlightened opinion from there.
Great.
I think one of the most important things to do is that we need to make the change from being sophisticated about technology to sophisticated about human nature, right? So there are couple different fields to study here in ergonomics, but really it's looking at the full stack from how our physiology affects our emotions, affects our attention and cognition, which affects our both individual and group sense-making and decision-making, to group dynamics and social behaviors in the social environment, right? If you don't have at least some, or your designers don't have at least some understanding of that full stack of how human beings work, like our origami, we're going to continually make products that break ourselves. And as the strength of our products gets more and more, eventually that becomes existential and catastrophic. So we're just putting together now, putting all of the best practices, at least this kind of checklist, at the Center for Humane Technology. It'll be the Humane Design Kit. That's a good way to start thinking about these things.
I was going to ask real quick, where can people find that?
I think it's humanetech.com/design guide, design kit. I can't remember, but if you just Google for it, you'll find it.
Also, another thing I should probably plug. I just come here from Brussels, where we had a meeting for the high-level AI expert group that we just, I think last month, we published this ethics guidelines that actually, again, it only focuses on the kind of the productization and services of the kind of existing techniques rather than thinking about future. But it does have checklists and things like that. Like if you're a kind of company or if you're a CEO, etc., you can look at it and see that.
The one other thing I'd add is that do not underestimate the power of language. To misquote Margaret Mead, she said, well, this is my version of it, never underestimate the power of language in a story to change the world, for indeed it's the only thing that ever has. When I'm looking for hope, I look back through time. I'm like, when have there been these times when it felt game theoretically impossible to get out of an incentive system or structure? One example actually is slavery, right? How could the UK, after the Napoleonic Wars, step away from slavery when all of their economy was based off of it? Especially because France, if they stepped away from slavery, France's economy is going to surge ahead. And yet we still did somehow by making it it became conceptualized as a fundamental human right. That was the story. It was about talking. And so it's about talking to each other, about to our bosses, to press, about this problem and projecting where it goes, because the great thing is nobody wants the future that we're sort of co-creating right now, which means that there's an incredible amount of momentum to change if we all just have the same language to talk about it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope this provoked some interesting thoughts and discussions. And thank you to Jan and Asa.
Thank you.
And that's our time.
Thank you, Asa, Jan, and Alyssa.